listening to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime, and no change from that, no deviation from that whatsoever. Today, as we dive into a difficult story, because of course it is about a missing young child, and that child also has autism. And we are, believe it or not, supposed to be joined. We've got two of our three best guests by a third best guest who is a member of the STS community who reached out today and said, hey, I'm an expert in autism. And I said, come on the show. So STS Nation, if you've got expertise, please let us know. survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. She has very impressive credentials in that world. From an Ivy League institution, the University of Pennsylvania. So we are hopefully going to have Heidi Moraine join us. But about the story, the mother of missing teen Sebastian Rogers said that she heard noise coming from her teen son's room on the night that he disappeared from his bedroom. It's been exactly 1 month today since Sebastian vanished from his family home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. It's a Monday, so I'm going to have trouble reading today. The search continues for Sebastian, who is believed to have wandered off in the middle of the night, or did he? They say he was barefoot with a flashlight and all alone. The Cajun Navy has stepped in. Of course, they were just working on the search for Riley Strain, but according to some reports, they've been told to stand down. So we will try to dig and get to the bottom of this. Let me introduce the best guest. David Thomas, no relation to the Wendy's guy, I'm assuming, but this guy is much more charismatic. He is a PhD and an LMHC. What is an LMHC? You got a lot of letters after your name.
Right. LMHC is licensed mental health counselor, so that's the licensure in the state of Florida.
And lest you were wondering, a PhD is tougher to get than a medical degree, which my father had. But a PhD is a tough degree to get. He's a professor of forensic studies at Florida Gulf Coast University. That is not far from me, across the state in Fort Myers, Florida. He is a retired police officer with the Gianesville Police Department, retiring back in 1998. He's also, Dr. Thomas is the author of the award-winning book, The State of American Policing, Psychology, Behavior, Problems, and Solutions, and a ton of other books as well. And just so you know, before I get the hate mail, I always ask the docs how they like to be referred to, and he said, just call me Doc. So if you hear me calling him Doc, that was from him, not from me. I'm not being disrespectful. So there you go. Doug McGregor, you know the face and the name. He is also known as the Geo Profiler. He is a forensic behavioral analyst and consultant. Wow, Monday is tough today. Specializing in geographic profiling and linkage analysis for violent crime and missing persons. He's got his Master's of Science from Missouri State University, lives in Ottawa, Canada, and we love our friends to the north. We also love our friends to the south here in Mexico. So just a quick note. I just want to let everybody know that the book tour, Surviving the Survivor, Carm and I are hitting the road, and here are some cities and dates. Boston will be at Hummingbird Books, and I'm going to put this all on social. Thursday, May 16th, 7:30 p.m. We're going to be in Toronto. Right now, slated to be at Queen's Books, but that might change. That's on May 21st. Books and Books in Miami, July 25th, which is my birthday and Carm's anniversary. And we are going to be in LA on August 15th. And again, I'll put this out on Twitter at Podcast SDS, on Instagram at Surviving the Survivor. And of course, let us not forget Tallahassee, where Dan Markel was murdered in such a vicious way. We're going to be there on June 6th in Tallahassee, 5:30 p.m. And look at this. Heidi Moraine is here. Hey, Heidi, how are you?
Hi, I didn't hit enter studio. My bad.
It is all good. Let me tell everybody. I mentioned Heidi is actually a member of STS Nation, and she emailed and said, "Hey, get me on this show today." And STS Nation is an amazing community. I always say best guest, better community. She has a bachelor's from Penn, which is a pretty damn good school. I did not get into it. I'm still bitter about it all these years later. She also has an MA and an MFA from Temple University, and she works for Philadelphia Family Voices as a family peer support, which she informs me is like a coach specializing in autism. So let's start with you, Heidi. Sebastian has autism, diagnosed with it, according to his parents. What does this mean? They say he is high functioning, but what does this really mean to us, the general public?
Well, the autism spectrum is a very, very broad one. And of course, I don't have any direct knowledge of anything, any clinical information about Sebastian, but you and I actually started chatting about the Kohberger thing when I said, people are writing in or saying things like, Kohberger has a very flat affect, and or perhaps in his case, it's like a kind of non-elastic. He has an affect, but it's kind of a non-elastic one. It's like on one setting, and he has poor social skills. He doesn't seem to make or form relationships easily, and so people said, autism. But the spectrum is very wide, and it is not just made up of a flat affect and inability to form relationships. I myself have an autism diagnosis, as does my eldest son, and I learned retroactively that both my parents would be considered on the spectrum. I realized pretty quickly my father was. But the main thing that you have to keep in mind, I think, particularly in a forensic context, is these are especially vulnerable children. And there always is going to be, I'm kind of starting off in the middle, so I hope you don't mind. There's kind of going to be a disconnect or a dissonance between the intellectual ability of what is called a high functioning autistic child and their ability to get social cues, particularly the kind of unwritten ones, such as the ones in the workplace. So he may not pick up easily on social cues. He may also not project his own needs and wants as clearly as somebody not on the spectrum might. So it's a population that's very vulnerable. And by the way, that's all through your life. I mean, I myself have to check in with people to coach me, and I will often say, am I reading this right? Or is there something I'm missing? Because I will, especially in the workplace, I will miss a cue. I will miss a social cue. I think in Sebastian's case, what we can say is he should be considered children are considered vulnerable anyway, which is why we got rid of child labor. Well, we have child labor laws is because we decided children are a vulnerable population. An autistic child or several autistic children or, as a community are particularly vulnerable. And it's because of the need for coaching or direct instruction, depending on the amount, or I shouldn't say the amount, it sounds like you're filling something, but the severity of the autism, they may need more or less coaching on how to interact socially. So safety is a big issue in the autism community because it's very hard to know how to make it clear that there are situations where you might not be safe. And that is an overwhelming dictum in the community. Even if you're a behavior therapist working on behavior, the primary thing to be conscious of is safety always.
And we'll come back to you on that because I already have questions. But most of STS Nation may not have heard a word you said because they are mesmerized by your cat, which is on your door.
I was going to say, I bet Fred and Ethel can't do that. So
No,
yeah,
100% not. Fred would fall on his face and Ethel would fall faster. But what is the cat's? We are a cat and dog friendly show here. What is the cat's name? How old?
That is Petunia, and she
Petunia.
is almost 3. And she opens cabinet doors. We had to childproof the terrace because she can open a glass door and a screen door and go out on the terrace. I'm surprised she doesn't make her own martini in the evening or something. But she's very naughty. She's also very bright. And I think she knew that I was going to be on screen and have a potentially national audience. So she likes to jump on things.
This could go viral for that reason alone. So we will see.
That's
yeah. And I will definitely circle back. I made it clear to Heidi that we're going to be really digging into the investigative side of this, but I have questions about the autism side as well. So we'll jump back and forth. But just to catch everyone up, and then we'll go to our investigators here, 2 smart guys. Sebastian Rogers disappeared literally a month ago. It was back on February 25th. He was 15 years old, and people in the community are just shaking their head. The last time he was seen was that evening. Again, as you just heard Heidi explain, the mother's come out and said he is a quote unquote high functioning young boy with autism, and described by his mother as being quote unquote very smart, not a mischievous child by any means. According to reports, he vanished from his home that he shares with his mom and stepfather. The father was reportedly out of town when all this happened, and she went to wake him up early in the morning, like 6 a.m. on February 26th, would be a month tomorrow. He wasn't in the room. Doc, you are a former Gainesville police officer. You've done it all. You've written books on this, and I'm sure you've been on missing persons cases more than a few times in your career. What, if anything, stands out to you about this particular case?
It's the lack of information. And by that, I mean, is the one thing that I know. I have a son that is autistic. He's 40. And the one thing that I know that he absolutely positively loves is the internet. That is really his best friend. And so when I started to think, when I'm thinking about this case, when you guys got a hold of me, I started to wonder, what is his, how much time does he spend on the phone? How much time does he spend, on an iPad or a computer? Because I know my son David that's where he spends the majority of his time. You literally have to make him get away. But that also means that is a place where predators prowl. And it is a place, the best manipulators I've ever met in my life have been predators. And I worked with a guy in prison where he convinced, just to give you an idea, he convinced a husband and a wife to allow him to move into their house, have their child sleep in the bed with him, and he took care of the child while they took care of their personal problems. He convinced them that their personal problems were so great, that was their sole purpose. So when you think about motivating a husband and a wife or manipulating them, think about how easy that would be for a child, a 15-year-old that has autism. So the question is, what came new into his life, and had he been courted by anybody, as far as I'm concerned, on the internet? Because that probably, to me, is the one key to all of this.
That is interesting. We'll get to Doug on that. 2 things strike me from that answer. One is, how does Doc have a 40-year-old child? He doesn't look a day over 40 himself. That is number one. You ever meet people who are just incredibly charismatic? That is Doc right here. This guy could be president of the United States with his charisma. Do people tell you that all the time, Doc?
No, they do not. And it's a job that I wouldn't want.
Really?
And in reference to my age, I'm 68.
There you go. You look fantastic. I would not blame you at all for not wanting to run for president. I can't blame you for that one. And by the way, both candidates are about 100 years older than you, so you got time still. That is not a political comment, by the way. It is factual. They are 168 each. Todd, Hudak Clement, Heidi, do you believe far too many people are undiagnosed right now?
Well, the statistic that I was told is that 92% of clinicians will misdiagnose a child, particularly if they are quote unquote high functioning. I'm going to try to not make air quotes, but I may say quote unquote. Yes, I would say yes. Also, the numbers, of course, are increasing. And that's because the spectrum is being acknowledged as a wide one. But clinicians will still often say, you know what, I don't want to saddle your child with that diagnosis. On the other hand, there are some clinicians that will, in fact, go ahead and say, well, this child may not just have autism, he may be intellectually disabled. And then you really are saddled with something if it's not accurate that that's the case. And so clinicians have, I did work as a clinician briefly as a behavior therapist, but I would say clinicians have a steep hill to climb in terms of autism because it's such a broad spectrum. But I think it's easy to miss in someone that is high functioning. My son is very high functioning, although we have many anecdotes that we can furnish about how he does hit all the hallmarks of being autistic. And I'm very high functioning, but I will often come to some point in my life where I say, well, if I didn't already know that I have an autistic brain, I know now because I'm responding a certain way. And the one thing that you have to understand about being bright, you know, when she says he's very bright, is, and I saw this a lot in my dad. My dad actually was a good example of this. He was brilliant. My dad was really brilliant. He got 4 degrees on the GI Bill at Penn. Mm-hmm. And he is the reason you can scan handprint. So he was really, he was really, really bright. But he was also very innocent at the same time. And this is something my husband used to remark on. So there is often intellectual ability far beyond what many people can possess, right next to an extraordinary amount of innocence. And you are definitely open to being manipulated. And you may even, even with coaching, I mean, I struggled a lot still, I wonder, in certain kinds of contexts, am I being manipulated? Am I seeing clearly? Because it's really, you're wired, unfortunately, you're kind of wired to have a disconnect, in a sense, between your street smarts and your intellectual ability. So when people used to say to me about my dad, particularly now that I think of it retrospectively, oh, but he's so bright, but there are things he wouldn't get, because they would just go right, certain kinds of very subtle social cues, particularly manipulation. I agree with Doc, particularly manipulation, right over the head. Because you're just innocent when it comes to those things.
Some of my smartest friends, I always say, are I don't know, the least savvy. They don't know how to do certain things, and guys who have zero education, to me, are the smartest. And have the greatest wherewithal. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. 9 Hal Mac, I have a 5-year-old granddaughter who is autistic and reads at a 4th grade level. There you go. So doesn't mean at all that you're not intelligent. Doug McGregor has not gotten into the conversation yet, so let's get him in here. I saw a couple of comments, Doug, saying, well, there are reports that this young boy is not on social media, things of that nature. But we've had numerous guests on, like Doc, like David Thomas, who are law enforcement or former law enforcement. And they say, look, just having a device, and he was apparently really connected to a computer, is incredibly dangerous, because now the predator is in your home, is on that device. Doug, how big a problem is that in general right now, that predators can get to you through these computers?
I completely agree with the Doc. It's such a problem these days. In my experience, parents have very little knowledge or control of the extent of which their teenagers are on these online sites, on social media. Somebody in the chat said, their kid's in a Pokemon game where they can talk to live people. That, again, is social media. Any of these games, any games, all these PlayStation games, video games, they're all talking to people, and, predators are in there too. They don't have any boundaries. They're everywhere. So, as the doc mentioned, he could have encountered one of these individuals anywhere. It's a possibility. Now, earlier last week, Sebastian's father, Seth, said that his phone had limited functions. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but but at home, it is my understanding that he liked to be online as well. So, you can control it to a certain extent with parent controls, but you can't watch your kids 100% of the time or control 100% of what they do.
Yeah. And Doug, from all the reporting I've seen, there was no sign of a break-in in the home. Of course, he lived with his mother and stepfather. We'll get to them in a moment, because apparently they have taken off. They're on the road now. And I don't know what that's all about, because if I was a parent, I'd want to be at home in case my kid came back. But we'll get to that in a little bit. And there are apparently reports that there is a fear that foul play is involved. So, Doug, I always ask you this question, but let's say you were brought in to consult on this case. Where would you begin?
Publicly, I'd be looking at Sebastian as a missing person, as an endangered runaway, which is the number one cause of missing children with autism. It's over, I think it's 84% of missing children with autism, somewhere around there, are endangered runaways. Now, the reason, however, behind the scenes, I'd be running concurrent investigations, which I'm sure law enforcement are. I can see Doc nodding his head. Publicly, I don't like to get ahead of the official or the law enforcement narrative, because then you confuse the public. You might give away things law enforcement doesn't want you to. So whether I'm officially consulting or whether I'm, consulting unofficially in the media, I still stay within the law enforcement narrative publicly.
Understood. Do we know, Doc, this one's for you. Rachel Rose asking, do we know if I told you we've got the best community. I say best guess, better community. Do we know if the mother and stepfather, by the way, Doc, Frankie Figs, remind me, because I'll forget the question about the lie detector. Look at this. Doc 2024. You look great, Doc. Doc has a Colgate smile. Wow, you're a handsome 68-year-old. Someone else said he should be an actor. Looking good. So if you need your ego stroked, you got to come here. This is the place. But STS overwhelmingly, look at this. You look great for 68. It goes on. Look at this. Best looking 68-year-old I've ever seen. Look at this. It's never ending. So lie detector test. You are a seasoned investigator. Doc, let's say I brought you in today as a lead investigator. You're outsourced. You come in there with all your experience. Where would you begin?
The most obvious is you want to eliminate the people that are closest to Sebastian. So that means mom and dad, mom and stepdad. Actually, even though dad is out of town, mom, stepdad, and dad. That way you can eliminate them, and then you can move on from there. Because that, oftentimes, like if you think about domestic violence or a murder where a wife or a husband is murdered, oftentimes that becomes the first place that you look, because that is the most common place. And the idea is to eliminate them, because if you eliminate them, that means that your investigation can move forward. If you cannot eliminate them, then that creates a problem. You're almost stalled. So you want to get them out of the way, and then let's move forward from there. Along with, I agree with Doug, having concurrent investigations. There's one thing that's going on privately, and those things I would call hidden crime facts. Those become the facts that law enforcement, they're not sharing with the public. And then there's the other side of that, where the media, where everything that's going on now, where the media sees everything and they're participating in that. But they have to go on separately, and they have to move concurrently.
Both of these investigators agree with that, and that's an interesting take. But I like how they are being careful not to override the narrative of the police officers who are involved in trying to investigate this case. The question always comes up, Heidi, the difference between Asperger's and autism. I've seen it in the chat a few times. Thanks, COE, for bringing that up. This, of course, is Sebastian Rogers. That's him with the little snake, his little puppy on the right. And that is his father, Seth Rogers, the one that's really been out there actively looking for him. And in that photo in the bottom, you can see, palpably that love that they have for each other. Again, the father is just heartbroken as he is searching high and low and everywhere for this child. But Heidi, to you, what is the difference between Asperger's and autism?
Well, the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that comes out that guides clinicians on diagnosing, and that has to be followed when you have an autism diagnosis, has now cut off Asperger's from the diagnostic conversation completely. I think particularly in the US, in fact, I was thinking about this today before the show. I suspect, and maybe somebody from England can tell me, I suspect in England it's not quite the same thing. You're really not supposed to say Asperger's anymore, but for those of us who were diagnosed years ago, or for whom the flavor of that word, so to speak, says something important about us, I still use the term Asperger's. It does impart, I don't know if flavor makes sense to you guys, but it doesn't impart a certain texture or flavor to what autism is like. And I would be considered Asperger's. My father was textbook, and my son probably was. And what this is a certain sector of the high functioning population that is probably more recognizable to your audience than someone like Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory. He would be considered an Asperger's kind of guy. Less so the guy in The Good Doctor. Do you know that show, The Good Doctor?
Yeah.
He's probably more his affect and his voice. And, probably somebody, by the way, would have coached him on his voice before he became a doctor, but, try to get it to modulate a little bit differently. But he's a little bit more, I don't even want to say impaired, but just not as, he doesn't function socially quite as much in what we would expect the mainstream to be like as, say, Sheldon does. Sheldon's quirky, the kind of quirky, bright, quirky thing, that's Asperger's. What is difficult about that as a label is that, and this is what brings trouble to the autism community. If your child is more severely affected, I remember a mom, we had a program for kids on the spectrum, my son and I, in the community. And I talked about it as, and I didn't mean to, but I kind of gave an elevator speech about it where I said, well, we're looking at kids with Asperger's and so forth. And she said, as soon as I hear the term Asperger's, I know it's not for my child. And my heart broke, because I have a brother who's severely disabled, who has autism and some other things, and is very severely intellectually disabled. And I grew up with a mom whose heart would break, and I would feel it. Whenever somebody said, how many children do you have? She would burst into tears. And so I know that heartbreak, the heartbreak of a mom with a disabled child. So on the one hand, it's a difference. A lot of people on the spectrum say it's not a disability, it's a difference, which is true. But there are differences in the level of impairment. And I think that one of the things that I wanted to say before that I would insert now is that I think it's also a question of how rule bound Sebastian is. There's another hallmark of autism that they call rule bound, which means that if someone says to you, don't do this kind of thing, and you really absorb it, you really take it in, then if somebody says, come on, let's go do this, you say, no, we're not allowed to. And you feel it, you really feel it inside your, you get a little bit terrified, and you say, no, we're not allowed to do that. So one of my questions with Sebastian would be, how rule bound is he? Did someone say, don't go out at night? And did he take that in and really absorb it? And did it become a rule for him? Or did someone say, you know what? your mom or your dad said we could break this rule, and Minecraft is particularly interesting at night. Or, who knows? I mean, that's pure speculation and very far-fetched. But one of the questions that I would ask would be, how rule bound was he? I suspect he was very rule bound from what I'm hearing about him, so that if someone said, we don't go out at night, he made up his own rule apparently about shoes. I don't go out without shoes.
Yeah.
So, that's another factor, is to what extent he was rule bound. And I agree with Doc. You don't know what they're listening to or watching on the internet. My sons continually surprised me. When my younger son was very young, he was asked what his favorite show was, and he said, Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he was 11. And his teacher went, oh. She was like, I have to call the parent in. I may have to call, She said, do you know what your child said in response to what your favorite television show is? He said, Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I said, yes. And he understands all the Jewish humor in it too.
I might be proud of that myself. So interesting. Thought criminal here. Back to Doc. Why wouldn't law enforcement come out and say, this is probably to your earlier point that you want to stick with the public narrative, but why wouldn't law enforcement come out and say that there's signs that Sebastian had been lured online? I mean, obviously they wouldn't say if it didn't happen, but people are thinking that it did, Doc.
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. The public has a yearning to want to know. And then there are the things that the investigators need to kind of keep to themselves, so that if they have a lead, they don't want that lead to dry up. And so they will if they have leads, they're going to hold on to those, and they're not going to give that information out to the public until they exhaust. I guarantee you, until they exhaust every lead they have, that you're not going to get that information, because then people are going to sit just like now. Why aren't they doing this and why aren't they doing that? And what you'll find out at some point is they have probably done all those things or in the process of doing those things. And so then once they've done that, then they can come out and say, hey, we've done this, this, and this. And so we need your help. But the online thing, I wouldn't give that up, because that is giving me a direct link or a direct line that nobody needs to know about.
Doc, I'm going to probably take heat for this because it'll blow up in my face, but you might have been around Gainesville during the Ted Bundy years. Is that true? Or is that before you?
That was before me, and it was before, and I wasn't there when Danny. Are you talking about Ted Bundy or Danny Rawling?
Well, both. When was Danny? Yeah, when was Danny?
That was 1980s, the late 1980s, early 90. And I came here 91 or 92, right after the murders he had been convicted.
Wow. A lot of horrific things going on there in Gainesville for that period of time. Doc, back to you, and then I want Doug to weigh on this as well. So the latest reports are that the mother and stepfather got into a trailer. The stepfather hitches a trailer to his truck, and then the mother follows him out, and they're on the road. They're gone. Lorna McKenzie says they moved away. Who does that when a child is missing? To me, that seems incredibly curious. If I'm an investigator, I'm going to be scratching my head. What do you say about this?
Well, as you read that, I don't know if you can see my eyes and my head. I'm at a loss because you're right. If my child is missing, I want to be there every step of the way, and I want to be holding law enforcement's hand, and I'd be bugging the hell out of them every day, every few hours for my child. So I don't understand how you pack up and you just move away. So that it is suspicious. And
Doug, what if Sebastian comes home and mom and stepdad are gone? I mean, it is kind of crazy if we're being completely transparent here. What do you make of this? The fact that the mom and stepfather are apparently gone on the road with their camper.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the first rules of a missing child is you don't leave your home if they went missing from your home. And by and large, most children with autism that go missing, they go missing from their home. So you don't leave your home because they may come back. Now, when I saw that they had packed up and left, two scenarios came to my mind. One, they have information from law enforcement that the public does not, and they do not need to be at home after receiving that information. or 2, law enforcement is going to search their premises and they're not allowed to be there. So those were the 2 scenarios that came to my mind.
Elizabeth noting too, police have been pretty quiet. Doc, is that calculated? Is that for a reason? Do they just not have information to offer, or do they know more than they're leading on and they're maybe setting a trap by not saying anything right now?
I would say both. I would say there may be limits to what they know, and what they do know, they do not want to share. I think that would be a fair assessment. Always look at, when you think of an investigation, always look at it as there are facts that are shared with the public, and then there's going to be a whole series of facts that should be considered hidden crime facts, the things that only the perpetrator of the crime would know and only that law enforcement would know. So, and those things will never come out until there's a warrant and there's an arrest made, and then that's when you'll see them articulate those facts. But that keeps it from muddying up the waters. Also, if there's I know everybody's seen where there have been movies of serial killers and that kind of thing, and they'll publicize something about a serial killer, then every nut job in the world shows up at the PD, and they all want to confess that they did it with just a few minute facts. But the hidden crime facts are the things that separate that nut job from the actual killer or himself.
I didn't mean to cover Heidi up there. I'm going to take this off. But the question, Heidi, was about pets and how important they are. And if you look at this photo, as I mentioned, he's got his dog in one picture and his snake in another. Pets are important to me, too. I love my 2 dogs. You love your cat, Petunia. It's a great name, by the way. But how important are they to either adults or children, in this case, with autism?
They can be very important because it's a way of learning relationships, of reciprocity in relationships, and of learning to be gentle, learning how to touch another living being. You know, you don't hit them too hard. You don't pet them too hard. You don't, actually what's funny is if you're in my household, I mean, my husband picks up another cat we have whose name is April. He picks her up and under the armpits and makes her dance to David Bowie. So, I would say that, and she doesn't like, clearly she doesn't like it, but, we do all kinds of, particularly before we had kids, we did all kinds of things with our cats to amuse ourselves. But, you learn how to pet a cat gently, how to pick them up, and you can interact. There's a kind of unconditional love with pets. And, dogs and cats are a little bit different in this, but you get a kind of unconditional love and loyalty and protectiveness, and, they'll snuggle up with you. It's a very nice way of encouraging a relationship building aspect of your child's life. And, I don't know, it could make it more heartbreaking than seeing all these pictures of him, but it's heartbreaking. But I'm sure that and my son, we have a picture of my son with a snake wrapped around him, by the way. He wanted to go into being I think it's called a what's it called when you study reptiles and amphibians?
Doug?
It's a oh God, what's it called? Anyway, there's a Latin long name for it. But anyway, he used to love reptiles and amphibians and always loved our cats. He and my other son had a pet sitting business. So yes, I would say pets are important. And you can forge a relationship with them that is unique to you and to them. And it's both different from and like, relationships with people. And it's a nice respite too. When I get home, I always say to people, I'm getting in my pajamas and grabbing a cat and putting on a podcast. And I can't wait to get home and grab one of my cats and snuggle up with them. It's really a way of unwinding and of feeling safe and safe and loved in the broadest, senses of those words. And yes, pets, I would say pets are important. And as somebody that is very much a pet person, I'd like to see all the pets in the world get adopted and have families and be loved and, all that kind of thing. So yes, I encourage pet ownership. Don't just have one, have 3 or 4, unless your landlord forbids it.
Pets are the best. And by the way, I've got a picture of Carm with a snake wrapped around her neck. I posted it before, but I will post it again. That was here in Miami. For Doc, if he doesn't know, Carm is the matriarch of this show. She is my mother. I've just written a book about her. She's a Holocaust survivor, and she's a bit of a wild woman at almost 85 years old. And yeah, she's up for the book tour. She's coming with me. She's going everywhere. So this, by the way, there's an Amber Alert issued for Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers. That is his full name. For those listening, the number to call is 1-800-TBI-FIND, 1-800-TBI-FIND, or 615-451-3838, 615-451-3838. He's wearing an optimism shirt. We all have to remain optimistic, and hopefully this little boy will be okay. There's a question here. I'm going to take this down just so I can bring up some comments, but there's a question here for Doc. Is this a case where pitting the mom and stepfather against one another with innuendo might shake things up and rule one or both in or out, Doc?
I don't necessarily think you have to pit them against each other. I think that the investigators themselves, if one or both are willing to take a polygraph, and I think that just kind of ends that for you. It ends all speculation. If they're not, then I would dare say that that's probably what's going to have to happen to try to get them to somebody to rat the other one out. If that's the case, if this happened inside the home.
Do you think they've been polygraphed yet, Doc?
I would like to think that they would have, but I would think that law enforcement, in my experience has been that when that's done, they usually come out and they will tell you because they want to take the suspicions off of them. So the fact that you don't know, it may be some new tactic that I'm unaware of, but I think historically what we've always done is we've come out and said, yes, we've done this and done that, especially when we're trying to eliminate those people who are prime or closest to the child or the person. Then that way we can eliminate them in the public. And it takes the onus off the public and the pressure from the public being on them, because that the media frenzy that goes with this, the media showing up at their house every day, all night, that would be one way to eliminate that.
Mrs. Jim Morrison, she's living off the licensing fee. Just catching up. I'm in New York. We just got hit with a huge storm. No power, no heat, and no YouTube for 3 days. I'm out of the loop. This sounds like the end of the world, like Armageddon here. Was it the stepdad? Was he found? Not found yet. Not the stepdad. Stepdad was out of town when this all happened. But this brings me to the geo profiler, Doug McGregor. Doug, so I assume when you're working, you also put together timelines. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that this timeline has to start before he went missing. So the mother was actually on a YouTube show, and I want to give it's called Chronicles of Olivia. So I want to give her credit. And the family was the mother, I believe, was on that, and she said that the day before, or the day leading up to his disappearance, I guess, which was the 25th, that day, she says it was a normal day filled with laughter and eating a quote unquote colossal amount of popcorn, and then a trip around town. She goes, there are a lot of specifics here. Her son took out the trash at the end of the driveway, as was his usual chore. And then around 9 p.m., he was told to go to bed. Well, hold it there. But someone asked if it was unusual earlier in the chat that she kind of had a very specific, detailed itinerary for the day. Do you find that at all, eyebrow raising? Is this typical? If you were talking to the mom, I guess, what kinds of questions would you have for her in terms of the timeline before leading up to this disappearance?
It's fairly fresh in her mind, so it doesn't raise flags on its own, and possibly because Sebastian has autism, his he may have more of a routine than other children. Heidi's nodding her head. They like routine. A lot of them like routine. So that doesn't raise flags on its own. For myself, if I was brought on for this investigation, as we just mentioned earlier, I'd be running concurrent investigations on my own. I'd be looking at, Sebastian as an endangered runaway. I'd also, behind the scenes, be looking at the 3 parents, as Doc had mentioned. And then I'd also be looking at a third scenario of anybody else that he trusts, specifically because that the video came out of the 2 flashlights. So in the middle of the night, who may be able to lure him out? Who might he trust? So I'd be looking at those, 3 different scenarios. And the timeline for me would start a minimum 7 days before, and if I was working with law enforcement, I'd want the phone records, any online records, financial transactions. Now, they may or may not have some of these things at that point, because some of these things they don't gather until they start looking officially at the parents. Doc can elaborate more because of warrants and stuff like that. But I'd be wanting all that information, vehicle GPS, anything I can get. And that's when my investigation would start, that 7 days prior.
And Doug, I'm curious, why a full week prior? What does that do for you?
Because I want to know Sebastian's routine, his routine activities. What does he do? I don't know anything about Sebastian. And for me, when it comes to a missing person, the first thing I do is ask the family, tell me about this person. Right. And I put a post online, but just one experience of my own. I have 2 experiences where I helped search for a missing autistic child. And one of them, it was a 5-year-old boy with autism. It was at a soccer field complex. There was about 60 kids playing soccer, all their parents out watching. They were all 4 and 5 years old. And a 5-year-old boy with autism went missing. Now, a lot of parents joined in to help. There were about 6 police cruisers there. They all drove around the streets looking for this boy. And it was the aunt that was there with the boy and the boy's younger sister. However, nobody had stopped to ask the aunt about the child. And that's important in any missing persons investigation, but especially with children with autism. And I asked the aunt, tell me about your child. And the second thing she said was, he loves, and I said, what does he like to do? What does he like? What are his interests? And she said that he loves trains. Well, there's train tracks about 400 yards away. So we ran to those train tracks, and luckily we found him there in about 15 minutes before a train came by. So, you have to know the child, right? You have to know the routine activities. And I'd also want to know his routine activities because, this goes to things like the canine search. Canines, they said that the dogs didn't hit on anything. Well, the dog should be hitting on his routine activities. If he walks to the corner store every day, a dog should have hit on that and followed to the corner store. These dogs are trained when they go through training. It's anywhere from 1 hour to 7 days, typically, after a scent is laid, and they routinely train in these time frames. So, why did a dog not hit on anything? Why did a dog not hit on? I heard that he took the bus to school and back, but friends' houses, the stuff like the corner store, sports fields. Why did a dog not pick up any of these scents? So I would and there might be a reason for that, but I would want to know his activities, the people he interacts with, and likewise, the investigation I'd be running on the side that's not public. I'd also be looking into all the activities of the parents, what they've done, where they've gone in those 7 days prior, and anybody else that might be important.
This is fascinating. I didn't know till now that you go basically a full week back. Ms. Trial here, this goes to Doc. Last whereabouts and info come from the mother and the stepdad, so take that with a grain of salt. And then there's a lot of comments about the father. Just so everyone knows, when I'm researching, which I do, sometimes people don't think I do, but I do quite a bit of research. But I'm usually kind of an old school news guy. Like I don't rely on a lot of the stuff that I'm reading on, let's say, Twitter. I never go on Reddit, but I know a lot of people do. But So I'm reluctant to bring this up, but I think it's important. So Brenda says the stepdad was married like 5 times, said to be very controlling. I did not know this, but according to Cindy Collins, the mother did take a polygraph and said she passed, but the stepfather was angry when he heard that she took it. So this is just, Doc, all of this obviously raises suspicion. What about the fact, as a retired police officer and a criminal justice guy and a professor now, it is true. The information, a lot of the information we're getting are coming from these people, and they have not apparently been ruled out yet. So what do you do as a former police officer with that kind of information?
You keep digging. The one thing I'll say is this: is called victimology. And so he wants you to understand that victim. Here's the one thing that I think people have a difficult time with. And I remember I've done several presentations, and people have said to me, I said, everyone has secrets. And that even means Sebastian, a child that has autism, he has secrets that he's not sharing with anybody. So everybody has those. So the code is to try to crack, the idea is to try to crack those secrets and get a much better understanding. That's why you would go a week out. And when you think about the information not being forthcoming or the parents not being forthcoming with information, then that's where you have to start digging in those holes. But that would come when you're looking at timelines, because now you're asking people to be precise, and then you're going to go back. And you're going to ask those questions again, and you're going to ask those questions again. And that's where you start to find the cracks in the story. So it's very time consuming, but that's what has to take place. And if the dad was angry, if the stepdad's angry, then that means the onus is probably on him. But that means that investigators will go back. And if he's been married 5 times, then they're going to go and talk to each one of those wives and find out what life was like with him.
I'm going to get back to Heidi in just a second, but one of the big pieces of information that came out was that the mother says, and I quote here, it's a direct quote from Katie Proudfoot, the mother. He was doing something in his room, Doc, because about an hour later, she says, I heard some noise. And I was like, I don't care what you're doing in there, but go to sleep. At 6 o'clock, I went to wake him up for school Monday morning, and that's when he wasn't there. I've covered enough news stories, 27 years of broadcast news, that, I'm an observer. I consider myself it's about my only skill, being a professional observer of people, but I'm pretty decent at it. And that struck me when she says, I heard a noise, because to me, that's almost like, and I'm not saying she's guilty, but my instinct is like, okay, there's an alibi trying to be created here. When you hear that phrase, I heard a noise, do you view it the same way or completely differently?
Well, I think of when I was growing up and I'd be doing stuff I shouldn't be doing in the room, and I'm supposed to be in bed and the lights are supposed to be off. My mom would hear a noise and she would yell at me about that noise. I think about raising my son, and I think about raising my stepson, and those words would come out. I wouldn't necessarily go check on the door to find out. But now the question becomes, if he was in his room, how did he disappear? Think about that. I mean, if it's a window that's opening, in this house, any window that will be open, you would know that has a very distinct sound. So that becomes the greater question. What was that noise? What does the noise sound like? What was it in tune with? And the fact, then you take it a step further where you saw the picture of the 2 flashlights going down the street. So the question becomes, that I think, to me, that those are all the greater questions that are a part of this. But to yell at my kid and tell my kid, because it'd be like, knock it off. There'd probably be some foul language to go along with it. And that, that would be it. Because at that time, they know you're serious about it. But yeah, so that's my 2 cents there. And
you hear the veteran investigator, a very simple question. If he was in that room, where did he go? Very simple question, but that's what investigators are asking. C-Star says 5 marriages has been verified. This is a funny comment. Marie P says number 6 is the charm. We'll see. But Doc, real quick, before we get back to Heidi, again, would you have any sort of biases 5 is a lot. 1 is all I can handle. Yeah, trust me, this is it for me and you, COE. She's the chief of everything, Doc. I know you're new to the show. The wife is a former news correspondent. She runs. She's in control. I'm just the radio face that's running the show. That's all. But what about this? That he's married 5 times as a former law enforcement officer. Does that raise your antenna in any way, or do you just say, "Hey, some people just like to get married a lot," or does that give you reason for pause?
It would give me reason for pause, but I can tell you right now that I know cops that have been married 5 times, because we are not good. I have been married. This is my 3rd marriage, but I've been with this lady for 35 years. So, so we're not good, but it leads one to wonder, and it also, for investigators, it's a prime place to kind of go and dig, so that you understand understand who and what you're dealing with.
Heidi, this is again a hypothetical, and it's a difficult question, but let's say someone has him. Let's just say hypothetically for a moment, someone does have him. He's in the grips of an abductor. How would someone with autism respond to that completely different environment, different structure, just basically being ripped away from what he knows?
I would think sheer terror, unless, that's a real far corner of the room to be speculating in. I don't know if that makes sense as an analogy, but
Yeah.
It's hard to say, because on the one hand,
Well, I guess another way of asking it is,
ahead.
let's forget the abduction part, but let's just say, let's say he's, and we're all praying that he's okay. If he's out there and he's not in his normal schedule, normal structure, what does that do to him?
Well, if it's been contextualized as a special opportunity for him, if somebody said, and again, I don't know how feasible this is, but as somebody that used to write scripts and really loves film and television and imaginary things, I guess you can posit that somebody said, we're going to do something special, but it's also going to be secret. And the law, the rules about secrecy is, you get up in the middle of the night, you don't have to put your shoes on, but, you go out the window, which is really exciting. And then this happens and that happens, and it's an adventure. But I don't know how long that can last. And it would have to be a very specific person in his life that he trusted that would say, oh, we're going to go on an adventure. And that, that might appeal to Sebastian, but the problem is that because he's 15, he may have started to develop some skepticism and or some ability to have fear when something new is presented to him. You'd have to really, actually, this is a really interesting forensic question. How do you groom an autistic child? Is there a specific map, to doing that? And there probably is. And I have to say, I hope to God that nobody decides to implement it, if there is such a thing. But I'm sure there would be a very specific way, using his, he doesn't elope. I think one of the things that, and I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but he doesn't elope. So you can
elaborate. What is that? I know what that means in a marriage.
In other words, no, it's not like that. No, it's very, very different. In behavior therapy, for example, you talk about elopement. One of the first things you ask when you work with a child on the spectrum is, do they elope? Meaning, do they all of a sudden on impulse just get the heck out? And it sounds like he doesn't elope, which means that he would not be expected to all of a sudden take off. Now, therefore, you have to ask, okay, under what circumstances would he take off? And if he's very rule bound, then somebody would have had to introduce him to the idea that the rules for an adventure happening in the middle of the night, let's say, or something is, very quiet, you go out the window, and now, of course, again, as I said, this is like a far corner of the room in which we're now stuck speculating, because I don't know how feasible or how likely that is. And the other
Heidi,
thing,
I'm sorry, but
go
this
ahead.
is an interesting comment right here that's up
Yeah.
on the screen. It says from Gabriel, because this is kind of the flip side of what we're talking about. The person who met, we don't know. This is complete speculation, just to be totally transparent. But if he was taken, it says an autistic person would be a stressful person to abduct. They can be stubborn. I've always worried about these kids in high control religions. They won't break easily, as awful as that sounds. Your response to that?
That's a good point. I'm like this too. If you have a very strong belief, and this is especially true in speech with people on the spectrum, they tend to be very unfiltered, and they will stick to the truth, and they will speak the truth even if it's not in their best interests. So if somebody approached him and said, we're going to go out at night and it's going to be an adventure, he could very well have said, we're not allowed to go out at night, or it's not safe to go out at night, at which point somebody would have to talk him into it. I actually don't. I mean, this is not my area of expertise, even though I am very much a true crime kind of gal, but the part of me would love to speculate in this direction, but my fear, if I were a betting woman, my fear would be that this was not what happened to him, because it would be very difficult to lure him out, or to make him break his routine, or to break a rule, unless it was presented to him in a way that really appealed to him and that made it okay to break the rule. And so therefore, you're thinking about somebody very close to him. Somebody very, very close to him would have to encourage him to break a rule. And it's true. I mean, I used to say to Julian, my oldest son, come on, Julian, let's do this. No, Mom, we're not allowed. We're not supposed to do that. And, I remember a huge battle back and forth on the lawn of one of the schools where I taught, where I was saying, come on, Julian, it's okay. No, we're not allowed. So, yeah, there's that too. I mean, my feeling is that this is not what happened. And
Heidi, what's your gut tell you happened? What does your gut tell you? I don't know if you want to publicly announce it, but I'm curious.
Well, if it'll get me a broadcast career, sure. But then I'll go ahead and do it.
Well, let me ask you this way.
I'm teasing Joel. I'm teasing.
Do you find the parents suspicious?
It's a bad place to make a joke.
we still have levity here.
Okay.
But let me get back to Doug and the doc.
Well,
wait,
can I just say?
Oh, I'm sorry.
One thing. Sorry. One thing that I would say is, and by the way, I do a great imitation of Nancy Grace. If you want to hear it offline, you have to do that online. You have to do that. I'm famous for my imitation of Nancy Grace.
Can you please share it? Can you please share it? She's going to have the parents on tonight. Can you tell us?
Oh, no, maybe a little bit later. But what I wanted to say was what she was worried about. One of the things that she was trying pretty hard to get autism. Not a lot of people do. She was actually trying pretty hard. And she said he might not be able to signal to somebody that he was in trouble. As looking at Sebastian's face in these photos, my sense is he does not have the flat affect that people usually assume is absolutely obligatory when it comes to autism. He does not have a flat affect. And I suspect that he would be somebody that would signal that he was in trouble. And therefore, he's a bigger problem to abduct, to make compliant. Well, on the one hand, the thing about behavior therapy that a lot of people object to is you're working on making a child compliant so that they can learn and sit in class and so forth. And so on the one hand, you worry about making them too compliant because then they will go off with somebody that manipulates them. On the other hand, he doesn't strike me as the kind of kid that would have such an impairment such that he wouldn't signal to somebody that he was in trouble. So I think Nancy was trying to probe that. Like, would he be able to say, to start yelling, I'm in trouble, whatever. I don't think he doesn't seem to have that kind of inability to signal that something is wrong or to shout out. But again, you'd have to be very close to him to manipulate him and get him to trust you. And that's, I mean, I was thinking of the term, Joel, you know, the term banality of evil that is always discussed when it comes to the Holocaust and so forth.
Yeah.
And, you know, you look at the father and you think the banality of evil. I mean, he just seems like an ordinary guy. Does an ordinary guy in the middle of the night harm a child? I would like to think no, but apparently you wouldn't have people like Nancy Grace climb to immense popularity if you didn't have a lot of people that were for whatever reason able to harm children.
Yeah.
So I can't fathom it, but do I think he was harmed in the middle of the night? Yes, I do. But
there you go. There's the answer.
But you know, and would I bet money on that? I would. I just, you know, he's clearly a tremendously loved child, and I listened to his father in an interview, and I just thought, wow, what a lot. I mean, you know, it's, you know, losing a child. I mean, I don't have to tell you, losing a child is every parent's worst fear, and I mean, you look at his face and you just think, wow, you know, I can't wait to see that smile again. But is there the banality of evil out there? Are there people that look ordinary, that, you know, in the middle of the night can, you know, can kill a child? I mean, I don't know what. Yeah. Anyway, you know what I mean.
No, we 100%. We need to stay positive and believe that he will be found. Alana Morris, not to be confused with Alana Morissette. And I'm bringing this up. You know, you can call me sensationalistic, but I'm having a very hard time getting past the stepfather and the mother taking off here. A lot of people, this is why I'm bringing it up in the chat, have said, check the camper. So, Doug, to you, I think you've been out of the loop for the longest here. So, you know, the father hitched this camper, and him and the mother, the biological mother, are gone. They took off. How quickly or not quickly do police need to? I'm sure there's a tail going, I would think. But does that camper need to be checked?
I think the camper needs to be checked. I mean, it depends on where you're at in the investigation. If you've switched over now to looking at the parents, the three parents, and you're doing this publicly, and you're investigating possible foul play, then absolutely, you're checking the camper, you're checking the home, and then you're looking at what's the motive? What do each parent have as a motive? And I mean, it could just be an emotional outburst, absolutely. But are you looking at homicide? Are you looking at abduction? So you're going to investigate each parent a little differently, but you're looking at the camper, you're looking at the home, you're looking at any property they own. You're looking at, you know, work sites, you know, routes to and from work sites, other anchor points that any parent has. And once you've switched over to that, now you're into body recovery. If you're not looking at abduction, if you're looking at homicide and that's what you're considering, you're into body recovery, and you either have evidence or you find evidence enough that you can pursue a no body homicide case, which can be done if you have enough circumstantial evidence. Or on the other end, you're bringing in somebody like myself that can help you locate that body with the assistance of canines and other technology, LiDAR, for example. But you're diving deep into their lives and everything they have, and then you're going to try and find a motive and what might have happened to Sebastian. But while you're doing that, you're still exhausting all your options of him wandering off. And I just look at the map in that area. If he wandered off on his own, you know, you have Hendersonville to the south, White House to the north, Gallatin to the east and Goodlettsville to the west with those, the roads 258 and 174 intersect. So, those are kind of your limits that you're really looking for if you wandered off on his own. If he had help and there was someone there with a flashlight and he was driven off, I mean, it's limitless. He could be, across the country by now. So you don't want to stop that investigation, but you start looking towards the other side of things as well.
And Doug, what about this fact, which is not a good fact, that his father says that he would not ask for help, that if you called his name, he'd probably look at you, but he might not even say anything.
That may be the case. With this case, I don't think that would matter. I think if he took public transport, if he's walking the roads, if he's going to any towns or cities, between all the news media, the podcasts, all the shows, his face is out there. He'll be seen, he'll be identified. He'll stand out a little bit behaviorally just because he has autism and he's a child, he's 15. So I think if he was in any populated areas and he wasn't, let's say, under the power of another individual, I think he would have been found by now. So I think you're either looking for him as lost and injured in the wilderness, that he wandered off and it turned into that, or you're looking into more of the foul play scenario.
So the mother, Doc, is quoted about the morning of March 26th. That's the day she says she went to the room, and I'll quote her here, Doc. "I didn't see him in his room. I looked all over. I ran through the whole house. I looked out all the doors and windows, and I was like hollering his name. I jumped in my car and I drove around the neighborhood, and I drove over by the school. And like at this point, I was like hysterical and I was crying, I was screaming." And then the mother and stepfather describe him as, quote unquote, "not a child that wanders." Again, Doc, I don't want to sound repetitive or redundant or conspiratorial, but if I was an investigator, and I'm not, some of the things she says would be curious to me, because she is saying he would never wander off, implying that he would have had to have been abducted. And she's laying out exactly, in an alibi sort of scenario, all these things that she did to cover, dot her I's and cross her T's. Am I just being sensationalistic, and do I need to hang up my gloves?
No, I think you're being a realist, and I think you have to look at that and you have to ask those questions. I can just tell you the cases I've gone to. The parents have done exactly that. They have torn their house apart. I can recall one case where they tore the house apart. We got the old cavalry out, and we asked, "Can we go in your house and just search one more time?" This is the honest to God's truth. Nobody bothered to check the cabinet. The 5-year-old was hiding in the cabinet and had fallen asleep. So sometimes it could be just as simple as that, because a parent's first, their mind goes to, "My child's not here. Are they in the house?" So you check the entire house. Would it be unreasonable for him to get up before mom and dad and go, and be around? No, that wouldn't be unreasonable. But then to look outside, but then now as I'm starting to drive to look around, I'm starting to pick up the phone and make the phone call, because I recognize that my child's not home. So the alibi, the way you talk about the alibi, I would say, yeah. But again, that means that investigators are going to sit and they're going to look, and they're going to try to pick those alibis apart piece by piece.
So you mentioned also the surveillance video, WTVF, I believe that's in Nashville. They obtained some security footage from the home, and it shows, as Doc explained, about 3:10 in the night, some what appears to be two lights that appear to be people with flashlights moving toward each other. What's interesting about this is both the stepfather and even authorities came out and said that, you might not be seeing what you're looking at accurately. It might not be an accurate portrayal. I assume you looked at this video, Doc. What did you make of it?
Two flashlights, but the law enforcement may have something that we don't, if that makes any sense. They may have, they may be able to explain it, and they're just not ready to do so. but that's what it appeared to be to me to be. So, but and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Doug, back to you. So the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, they, issued an Amber Alert when this first happened. 5'5". He weighs 120 pounds. Last seen wearing black sweatpants and a sweatshirt. Authorities believe that he wandered off, as we just talked about, with a flashlight and no shoes. The search has been relentless up to this point, at least when it comes to authorities and the father, and now the Cajun Navy's involved as well. Seth Rogers says, I've been all around Nashville. I've been passing out flyers. It's time to start branching out further. What kind of perimeter do you have to create for this search area, Doug? How do you even begin to approach that? 'Cause you don't know if you went north, south, east, west, but how do you map that all out?
So I did look at the map they had of the of everywhere they've searched and the different resources they've used, and it does seem pretty thorough. I can't comment on how precise and organized it was. I did see a comment that they've searched 2,000 miles, and to me, as somebody who searches for missing children, that means nothing. It might have just been something they put out publicly, and that's fine.
Tell me why. Why does that mean nothing? Explain.
That means nothing is because you could have a 1 square mile and one person walk back and forth 1,000 times, right?
Mm.
So just that one number doesn't really mean much, but it does look good publicly, and they just don't want to get into explaining it. That's fine. When searching for teenagers, there's two primary reasons that a child with autism or just a teenager in general is going to leave home. They're running away from something, or they're running to something. It's that simple. Running away from something, a stressful situation at home, something emotional at home, or which could include abuse, emotional abuse, or just some stress of being a teenager, or they're running to something, something that interests them. For example, a place, an item, whatever it may be. Now, statistically, and I'm going to use meters here because I'm Canadian, but statistically, most teenagers that run away from home emotionally to try and get away from home are found within, a 300 meter, just think of it as 300 yards radius from their home. They're just trying to get away, cool off, have a cooling down period. So they're either found in that 300 meter radius from home, or they're found 50 yards, 50 meters, either side of a route between their home and an anchor point, generally school. So those are the first places you want to look, and that's where you want to start your search. You want to get a hasty search out there, search in those areas. And while you're doing that hasty search, which can be done right away, it doesn't require any coordination. You just need 10 people to get out there and search those areas as fast as possible. While you're doing that, you put together a circular search. Now, that changes a bit with autism. So, a circular search, you start from the home and you circle outwards. And you just keep going until you've searched everything, until you've exhausted your area, maybe out to a mile radius, whatever it may be. And it just gets bigger and bigger as the days go on. Now, with somebody with autism, rather than a circular search, you're probably going to do a grid search. Now, what that is it takes a lot more people. It takes a lot more time, but it's more precise, and it's very more specific. So rather than everybody walking, say, 10, 20 yards apart, you're very close together because you're trying to hit all those confined spaces. Children with autism tend to go to confined spaces. They tend to hide from things that are overstimulating. And that could be sirens. It could be shouting. It could be dogs barking that are looking for them. So you want to make sure that you hit all those spots. So the search parameters change if you're searching for somebody with autism. And, it looks like they did a pretty good job searching. They used a lot of resources, and now it's changed a bit. And the United Cajun Navy is in there, and they've asked, for a couple days, everyone back off just so we can coordinate and reorganize this search, which I think is a good thing, because the last few days, the search for Sebastian has been a cluster. I'm not going to finish that sentence, right?
Yeah.
So they do need to reorganize. They do need to come up with a plan. For both land and water and everybody they have, because everybody's trying to get involved, and they just need to figure out what's been searched, what hasn't. And it's tough searching for people in general, because you have to know that all your searchers are willing to do what you need them to do. And especially with somebody with autism. And now when I say that, I'll give you an example. If you have 10 really good searchers searching for somebody, you know that every one of those searchers isn't going to skip something because it's dirty, or it makes them feel uncomfortable, or it's dark and scary, or it has spiders in it, such as like searching under a deck, right? As soon as you get 100 people in there, how do you know that someone's just like, I didn't want to go in there because it was scary, right? And now you've missed that spot. And now you're never going to go back and search it. And he could have been there the whole time. So
Wow.
it's not the number of searches you have. It's the quality of searches you have, and the fact that everybody's honest and everybody's doing the job that they've been assigned. But you need somebody to lead that and assign those jobs.
And that is something I would never think of, but it is so obvious. Glad you pointed that out. The PSS, the Philadelphia Shoulder Surgeon. Doc, I thought with Amber Alerts, there needs to be a vehicle or person that took the child. Has that changed? Do we know if that's changed? Because they did issue an Amber Alert, from what I understand, but no one took him, and he didn't go in a car, or no one took him that we know of, I should say.
No, that hasn't changed. You can still, but you can put in missing and endangered children, just like you can missing and endangered. You can put in anybody that they feel is missing and endangered with a certain set of criteria, and it does not have to be a vehicle. The vehicle helps, or the person that may be driving the vehicle, but you do not have to have that. Have those. Those are not necessarily requirements.
And it's always, to me, it's always the very simple things, like what Doug just said about someone being afraid to go check under a deck, which I probably would be because of spider webs and bats and whatever else. And who knows, that could be the one spot that you needed to look into. I looked up some missing stats on children, and the latest data that's accurate is from 2022. It's a lagging indicator, as they say, but there were about 360,000. It was 359 and a little more than that, missing children in 2022. 95% of that 360,000 is usually they're found fairly quickly after running away. And then the abduction, they say, by non-custodial parents or relatives account for most of the remaining cases. Doc, that's interesting that it's non-custodial parents. Step parents have a big job, but you hear people joking around like it's always the stepfather. Is it true that it's more likely, I guess, to be the stepfather than the biological father that commits acts against children?
I would dare say yes, because a lot of times that person is new into the house, and there are certain stressors that go on, and it in a lot of ways it impacts the relationship. And so that's, and I didn't bargain for this. I didn't marry into this. And so the pressure oftentimes comes on the spouse. And so they agree or don't agree, or the spouse turns the head and allows something negative to happen. So that's a fair assessment.
And Doug, what is your precise podcast? Because Twitter handle. I follow Doug closely. He's always putting out really interesting info. But what is your Twitter handle, Doug?
It's at the GeoProfiler.
There you go. It's the G. I always put at GeoProfiler. So you got to put the in there. So the Cajun Navy reported, we're going to wind it down here in a moment, get final thoughts. But the Cajun Navy reportedly did not search Sunday. They were asked to stand down. And Steve Fisher, who was on the show for Riley Strain, which ended up not being a good situation. Of course, he was found, the 22-year-old University of Missouri student was found in the Cumberland River. So a horrific ending to that. But from Steve Fisher, who was on our show about that, he says in a tweet, I believe the United Cajun Navy was asked to stand down in the search for Sebastian Rogers due to protocol and safety concerns. Search and rescue teams operate under law enforcement authority or mutual aid missions can be granted temporary authority. This is contingent on the search and rescue team being well trained, and it goes on and on. But the bottom line, the bottom takeaway here is that they have been told to stand down. Before that, though, I did see people asking. They were searching with dogs, at least in some areas, but so far, obviously, no luck. And this is another horrible situation. I mean, we're doing 3 high-profile missing cases right now. So it is, there are far too many missing children. But kind of putting a cap on this for now, at least. Heidi, do you have final thoughts, parting words about, what
I do.
what
I
we
do.
can,
And
okay, so go for
I
it.
do. And they're very sad ones. And
Okay.
so
Please do share.
it's a sad thing to come to, but I would say that it would take an awful lot of work to lure a 15-year-old child who's very bright, who's autistic, but who's very bright out. And my feeling is that the stepfather, that would be a lot of work. And my fear is that it's quite possible that the stepfather didn't want to work this hard, didn't want to have to work so hard to raise a child, didn't want to have to put in the amount of work and effort and heart and soul and head that you have to put into raising a special needs child. It's a lot of work because you have to advocate, you have to be attuned to different things that are outside of your own comfort zone and so forth. And my fear is that he didn't want to put in the work, and he wouldn't want to put in the work to lure him. And therefore, that's what makes me think he may have come to a very quick end, because I don't think my suspicion is that he's not a guy that wants to put the work in. He doesn't want to put the work in for maintaining a marriage. He doesn't want to put the work in for raising a special needs child, and he wouldn't want to put the work in for luring him. So he would probably do something to subdue him quickly and remove. I hate to create a map of how to do this, but that's my suspicion, and that's why I think it's sad, because you have to be willing to put in the work to raise a child with special needs, and he probably is not one to do that, unfortunately.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because people have been saying that in the chat all night. Right here, Lindsay Gandy, who's a friend of the show and hooked us up with Adam Cox, Lori Vallow's brother, and Rex Connor, Grunkle Rex. Having a special needs child is not for the faint of heart. And this guy was married for the 5th time and was like, marriage is hard enough. Now I'm dealing with a young child with autism, and perhaps that's all he could take. But the investigation is still ongoing. This, of course, was Heidi Moraine. And not only is she an expert on autism, not only did she go to the Ivy League University of Pennsylvania that rejected me back in 1986 or 87.
You didn't miss anything, Joel.
I'm still angry about it.
Didn't miss anything.
Let me tell you a very 3-second story. I was dying to go to Penn. I applied early, but University of Michigan had a rolling admission. They still do. And I got a call. We had phones in Mrs. Ross's math class, and the phone rings, one of the old rotary phones, and they tell me to go down to the office. There's great news. And my mother is on the other end of the line to tell me, you were accepted. And I said, I cannot believe I got into Penn. She goes, oh, no, you didn't. You got into University of Michigan, which is an amazing school. And I should have gone to Michigan. And I'm not going to bore everyone with all my pent up anger and resentment about this, but Penn, screw you, Penn. That's all I have to say.
I would not disagree with you on that. It doesn't have a great culture, Penn. I shouldn't say this because, who knows, they could give me my next job, but I would say the culture there is not the best.
Yeah. Well, look at this. Ned Smith.
They accepted Trump after all, without getting political, without getting political.
Tom Brady went to Michigan, and Out of the blue last night. Oh, I think we were talking. I think the COE, Carmen and I were talking about Giselle, and she said, and I quoted it. I put it on Instagram at Surviving the Survivor. Carm said, "I don't understand Giselle. That Tom Brady, he's not my type at all," is what she said at 84.5. She said, "I wouldn't give him the time of day," which I thought was hilarious. So I had to put it out there. Doug McGregor, better known as the Geo Profiler. He's a forensic behavioral analyst and a consultant specializing in geographic profiling. The guy knows how to search for people and get answers. Doug, where do you go from here? I'm going to say this. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it. I am highly suspicious of the mother and the stepfather. But if you're legitimate law enforcement, I'm going to ask the doc this in a second as well. But where do you go from here?
From here, I let law enforcement do their thing. You know, he's an endangered youth. They'll continue to search for him. They'll do their work behind the scenes, as the doc spoke about earlier. And you know, the father has asked the United Cajun Navy to come in, and I don't know a whole lot about them, but they're a group of volunteers of the public with boats, and they're still the public. And the law enforcement is not going to divulge everything to them. But it's good to have somebody to come in, organize volunteer searches. And if they can do that and they're efficient at it, then that's great. Let them do that. But from here, you know, let law enforcement do their thing. I guess one piece of advice I can put out there is, you know, just be careful with the speculation, the false accusations, all that from the public, because you know, we have no idea. You know, I have trained in deception detection, emotion recognition and analysis, forensic linguistics, and I've done that because it interests me. But in the end, behavior is very hard to read. You know, watching them do these interviews and what they say, it doesn't mean they're guilty. They may come off as a little weird, or behavior might seem odd, or answers or whatever. But, you know, I like geoprofiling because in the end, there's a science aspect to it. You know, I agree with Heidi that raising somebody with special needs it can be very difficult, because I've known quite a few people that have done it. But from me, from my perspective, that's why I like geoprofiling. It's got the science. I don't need to overanalyze all these things and speculate. I can work behind the scenes with data, and the biggest thing I like about geoprofiling is you can lie. Everybody lies. You can lie. You can mask behaviors, but your spatial behavior, you cannot hide that. It comes out no matter what. So that's why I like geoprofiling. But in the end, you know, law enforcement will continue the investigation. And if you have a special skill set like Heidi does, like the doc does with his experience, you know, it's okay to offer it up to the agencies in charge, the TBI, or whatever other agencies officially are involved here, EMD when they were doing their search, even the Cajun Navy. It's okay to offer up your services if you're a subject matter expert and you have something to offer, but don't, and this goes for the Riley Strain investigation as well, don't implant yourself into these investigations without being accepted in. You know, I offer up my services. If the agency doesn't want it, I step back. That's fine. I don't try to implant myself, because you just confuse everything. You confuse the investigation. You can make it worse. So, you know, if you have something to offer it. If it's accepted, great. If not, take a step back and let it play out, and let the professionals look after it.
And Seth Rogers, on that note, the father of Sebastian, you've got an open platform on this show if you're listening. And if you need the geoprofiler's help, hit us up at survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com, survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. And if anyone has any access to Seth, and I know Steve Cohen is working on this behind the scenes, would love to have him on the show to raise awareness. This story should be getting more attention than it is. A guy that deserves attention is America's favorite troll, Mo Dean. He's back. Guess what? This guy has a legit regular job. I was like, why isn't he on? He's like, I got a life. I work. And there you go. This is what he told us. So everyone is a suspect, he says, until the situation is resolved, but no one is guilty until the situation is resolved. Modine saying it like it is. By the way, tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time, we're diving back into the circus. That is the Karen Reed story. I want to know why everyone is so polarized when it comes to Karen Reed. And we're going to discuss that tomorrow without Wendy Murphy and without Turtle Boy. Although I am tempted to bring them back on because that was the craziest show in the history of STS. And we always have to top the crazy here, I guess. Last but not least, I am purposely saving the doc for last. David J. Thomas with 7 letters after his name. PhD, LMHC, and also just a great guy. People are asking, it got even crazier. Speaking of crazy, Doc, they're asking if you're single, if you're available. Got a running joke here about STS singles. You heard the guy say that he's been with the same woman for 35 years. So no, he is not single. He is not available, but he is an author. He wrote The State of American Policing, Psychology, Behavior, Problems, and Solutions. Doc, if you're police at this point, you've got to be thinking about the mother and stepfather. It just has to be on your radar. So are they tailing them if they're on the road? What are police officers doing at this hour? What do they need to be doing?
Oh, I'm sure. I would dare say I'm sure they probably have warrants to be able to attach like air tags to GPS so they know exactly where they are and where they're going. Because they are, whether fortunate or unfortunate, they are going to be your prime suspects, especially if you don't have enough information or you can't rule them out. Another thing that I'll leave the viewers with is this: the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So when I sit and do psychology, or I'm doing mental health, or when I worked at the prison with inmates, that was probably one of the best predictors of what you can look at somebody. So if you're looking at the stepdad, then let's go back and look at his life and see what that was like. If there are kids involved, what was that like? So I think, but that is one of those things where law enforcement, and I know we would like to have answers today, like right now, but you got to give law enforcement an opportunity to be able to do their job. This isn't really a cold case because everybody's hustling and they're trying to do the best that they can. But I think you got to give them an opportunity to let those wheels turn. And I have to agree with Doug in that respect, that there's just that has to take the focus. Now, if it's determined that they flubbed it, then that's when it goes another way. But right now, I think you have to give them trust that they're going to do the best. I know they're going to do the best that they can, no matter what. So that's all I got there for you.
And I trust in the process as well. I trust in law enforcement. I always say I'm very pro law enforcement. They're doing the best they can right now, and they might know a lot more than we know, and maybe they're just waiting for something. McSpunky here, a generous soul, gifting 5 memberships. Gretchen, I feel the same way. I live in Massachusetts, although I don't live there. Too much Karen Reed, kind of dislike both sides. You sound like me now. And then, of course, who can debate this? Great panel, as always. Heidi, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but can you...
Please put me on the spot.
Can you do a Nancy Grace for us? Can you just... She yelled at me right away when I was on. I said that I forget what the story was already, but I said it was a fascinating case. And she goes, you don't say fascinating. Don't use the word fascinating. These are real people, real victims. The word fascinating I thought it was okay, but I got you. Can you do one for us?
Well, it was more, do you remember when she had a call-in show?
Uh-huh.
And it's really not so much an imitation of her, but it was an imitation of her call-in show, because it used to be that she would take calls and some little, usually with some little, probably very innocuous little old lady somewhere, and she would call in and say, Nancy, I love your twins. I love when you show pictures of your twins. So do you think he dismembered her before putting her in the lake? Would be like that. It would be like no pause between "I love your twins" and "Do you think you chopped her up real fine?" You know. So anyway,
That's
but yeah.
there you
Anyway,
there-
I listen. I am nearly a pariah in my little family because I love Nancy Grace, and when my husband hears her, he goes, "Ah," except that he loved her take on the Gwyneth Paltrow trial.
Mm. I
He
have to
thought she
say,
was funny.
I met her at Crime Con, and she's a very, 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 very sweet woman. I thought she wouldn't be, but she was. So I've got to be transparent there. But again, tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time, we're doing Karen Reed, a special time. Oh, by the way, Carm is coming back. Sound the Carm alarm on
Yay.
Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. We're talking Jeff German or Herman, depending on how you pronounce it, spelled like German. And he was murdered in Las Vegas. He was an investigative journalist, and the person accused of committing the crime is a publicly elected official. And the way he did it was pretty sick. And so Carm is coming on Wednesday at 12:30 to discuss that. So appreciate everybody. And Ruth Markell is coming on with the notorious COE. Look at this. Look at all this programming on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern with the notorious COE. You got back-to-back shows on Wednesday, 12:30, Jeff Drummond, and then Ruth Markell at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Ottawa, Canada. Love you, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And, of course, Fort Myers, Florida. And listen, write in your vote and write in David Thomas. You cannot go wrong. 2024, it's all about David Thomas. See you all tomorrow. Panel, stick around 1 second.